The final two games of the Memphis Grizzlies season is here. But what did we learn? We just watched the Grizzlies play 80 games so far this season, and a bunch happened, and a lot of players played. We got to talk about all that, the surprises, the bummers, and we're going to preview the last two games of the season coming up right here on Locked On Grizzlies.
You are Locked On Grizzlies, your daily Memphis Grizzlies podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, everyone, and welcome back to Locked On Grizzlies. I am your host today, Damichael Cole, beat writer for the Commercial Appeal right here in Memphis, Tennessee. I want to thank you for making Locked On Grizzlies your first listen each and every single day. We appreciate you guys for tuning in. Make sure you continue to tune in wherever you get your podcasts: Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher. Whether you want to watch on YouTube, Locked On Grizzlies is available on all of those platforms. And we appreciate you guys for continuing to rock with us throughout all of this time. On today's show, we got a lot to talk about as we kind of reach, the penultimate game of the season. And then by the time Monday's show comes around, we'll be 82 games in. So the Grizzlies have finally, in a lot of you minds, it's finally, right? This season feels like almost 4 seasons in one. You remember the beginning of the year. It was, everyone's super excited, but boom, Ja Morant suspension, Steven Adams out for the season, surgical procedure. Then the Grizzlies go 6-19, and everyone's excited again because Ja Morant gets back, right? And then Ja Morant gets back, and they look good. 6-3 in the games that Ja played, but 6-3 in the games that he played because he only played 9 games. Ja gets hurt. Then Desmond Bane gets hurt. Marcus Smart gets hurt. All of a sudden, the Grizzlies are struggling really badly to the point where key players get traded, which we'll talk about a little bit later. And now that leads us to where we are now, where pretty much none of the super relevant players from the beginning of the season, I'll word it that way, are available at this point. So it's been a trying season all in all, which led me to the question. When we talk about end of the season reflections on what's happened up to this point, where do we start? And what I mean by that is when you talk about the Grizzlies and the end of the season reflections, what's happened, all those things that I just said that's happened this season, the question that I would ask you, and I'll give my answers to, is what did we learn this season about the Grizzlies? And me and Joe Mullinax, my co-host, who's getting a well-deserved day off here, we were talking about this from the standpoint of, is this a lost season? Is it a gap year? And I think Joe landed on the idea that this year is a gap year. And I feel like, yes, it can be described that way. But this isn't a gap year to me. Quite frankly, it's a loss year. And the reason that I say that is because of the financial obligations and everything that comes behind it. So to break it down a little bit further, and we talked about this a little bit in previous episodes, but if you look at the Grizzlies' financial situation, this was the year where Memphis could, they finally made that wing change, right? Over the last couple playoff runs, we saw, Dillon Brooks against Golden State just, chuck up a lot of shots. We saw, Dillon Brooks against the Lakers in the first round series not look so great. So they finally addressed the wing position, and you go out and get a guy like Marcus Smart, and he makes an impact. You make these other changes on the roster and whatnot. But the idea was that the Grizzlies this season, we would get a real good sense of where they could be going forward. And then you'd know what type of moves needed to be made this upcoming off season. Now, I think, and that's the key here, I think the Grizzlies can be really good with Marcus Smart playing that small forward spot or guarding the best perimeter player and all those things and playing him alongside of Desmond Bane and Ja Morant. I think Memphis could look good in that situation. But do I know it for sure? I didn't see them play a lot of teams. I didn't see them go against Paul George and Kawhi Leonard with that trio with John Morant, Desmond Bain, and Marcus Smart. I didn't see them go against the Suns. Have to guard Devin Booker, Bradley Beal, and Kevin Durant with that trio. So even the Clippers to a lesser degree. But with all that being said, my thing is there's still a lot of unleft questions in terms of what needs to happen going forward to get this team over the hump. We all think we have the idea, right? You think, oh yeah, just go get a big, go get a nice quality center, and then you got John Morant, Desmond Bain, got wings and all that. But do they though? And what I mean by that is, do they have, everything that they need to have, everything that they want to have? And in my opinion, I think so. I think you have enough with John Morant, Desmond Bain, Marcus Smart, Jaren Jackson Jr., potentially a solid center. Then you have Vince Williams, Luke Kennard, who can be that fifth starter and replace whoever that other wing option is in the lineups and whatnot. Like if it's Marcus Smart or if and you don't want to play small, or if you want to go smaller, you can go, Vince Williams and all those. Like they give you optionality. Luke Kennard, Vince Williams off the bench, G.G. Jackson, who me and Joe have talked about. Is he going to be in the rotation and whatnot next season? That's another name, G.G. Jackson. So when I talk about end of the season reflections, that's kind of where I land. It's a question mark for me. It's a huge question mark, and I don't know if that's a great thing, being that, again, I keep going back to why this season was so important, because this is a year when we're in 2026 and we're talking about the Grizzlies roster construction, or it's 2027 or even 2025, all of it is going to trace back to this very season. And that reason is because next season, Desmond Bain, John Morant are both on maximum contracts. Jaren Jackson Jr., Marcus Smart are both making more than $20 million next season. So you got pretty much four players taking up most of the salary cap, like going into next season. And you're talking about, with all these things considered, they're going to be a first apron team, potentially even getting into the second apron. And we know with each apron, when you go past the luxury tax, there is, some penalties, I guess you would say, for teams that, or limitations. Limitations is a better way to put it. If you're a first apron team, if you're a second apron team, there are limitations that come with that. So in order for the Grizzlies to kind of avoid those things, you needed to see Desmond Bain, John Morant, Marcus Smart in an extended stretch of time, and then you'd have a better clue. You'd say, hey, look, man, Marcus, yeah, he did his thing against the Pelicans and, the Lakers when the Grizzlies beat them and whatnot, but he's struggling. Like, I'm thinking in terms of next year. He's struggling against, the KD-led Suns or the Jason Tatum-led Celtics or whatever the case may be. And in that case, you ask yourself, if we would have got more time last season to really see what he brings to the table, for better or for worse, do we make the same decisions? And I don't think the Grizzlies will make the same decisions this upcoming offseason based on that idea, based on if things didn't work out, or whatever the case may be. So that's pretty much my big end of the season reflection. I think Taylor Jenkins said something similar. I asked Taylor, like, what do you take from this season? And pretty much he said is, I just hope we get all the guys back next year. So that definitely seems, like a big surprise to me. But speaking of surprises, we're going to talk about surprises and we're going to talk about bummers. Because there's been some of those in each category this season with the Grizzlies. So we're going to talk about that next. But before we get to that, this episode is brought to you by our friends over at Stitch Fix. That instant confidence boost that you get from an outfit. And then, it makes you feel really good. Because if you look good, you feel good. And that's what I get with Stitch Fix. It is the thing about Stitch Fix is it can easily upgrade your wardrobe this year with a professional stylist that helps you find new on-trend favorites that will work for you. See, look, It's for me, I just give my stylist my size, and I'll throw in some budget preferences, and I order boxes when I want and how I want. No subscription required. And by the way, they will send 5 just for me pieces, plus outfit recommendations and pro styling advice. I keep that works and send back to the rest. So it's simple as that for me. And for you, it can be that simple as well. The style that makes you feel as good as you look. Get started today at stitchfix.com/lock on. Again, that's stitchfix.com/locked on. So make sure you go take advantage of those terrific opportunities with our friends over at Stitch Fix. This episode is also brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your drive, ride or die, keeps it alive because you need it to be alive. And that's what eBay Motors does for you. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, not racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered with over 122 million parts for the number one ride or die. You'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your partner is guaranteed to fit your ride every time, or they're so confident they'll just give you your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit is also only available to U.S. customers. Coming up here on Locked on Grizzlies, we got to keep this conversation going. From the surprises and bummers as we reflect on this season. Stay tuned for that. Welcome back to Locked on Grizzlies, everyone. I am Damichael Cole, beat writer here for the Commercial Appeal in Memphis, Tennessee. I want to thank you guys for tuning in with us on Locked on Grizzlies so far today, as we talked about just, reflecting on last season and what it was and what happened and all those good things. And for me, I settled on the idea that my reflection was the fact that I didn't really learn enough. Like, I didn't get enough clarity on what this team could be and what this team should be. Sure, everyone around the team will say, hey, it's championship or bust or whatever the case may be. But at the end of the day, it's just something about seeing it with your own eyes. If you trust them, by the way, if you trust your eyes with this basketball stuff, it's something about seeing your own eyes that tells you, hey, that guy can play or whatever the case may be. But let's get into these surprises and bummers because that's kind of a big one in terms of what we really learned this season. And for the surprise part of it, I'm going to talk about the wing depth. Because if you remember correctly, the Grizzlies came into the season and people were still hopeful that OG Anunoby, Mikal Bridges, the list goes on. A bunch of different wings were kind of linked to the Grizzlies, but the Grizzlies, pretty much, they had to play, the guys who were available. And that led to, Gigi Jackson getting a lot of playing time. That led to Vince Williams getting a lot of playing time this year. And who would have thought? Because the biggest surprise for me is the wing depth that was created for the Memphis Grizzlies. Now, all of that depth still is quote-unquote great depth, but you got a ton of options as you go into next season with guys under contract. When you think about who's going to potentially start, for one, Marcus Smart, Desmond Bane, those guys. Then you got Luke Kennard coming off the bench. Then you got pretty much your known guys, right? Vince Williams, the way he played last season, you can pretty much pencil him in. The way he played this season. And then there's a few other guys. John Conchar has been steady throughout his career with the Grizzlies. Jake LaRavia has had a couple games in March where you see, oh, yeah, that's why. That's why he was that first-round pick that Zach Kleiman identified as someone who could really help the shooting. And then there's some other games where Jake LaRavia doesn't shoot well at all. And it's like, what's going on? So at the 4 position, you got this big log jam. And I think more than not, when you talk about these players, everyone progressed. Like I talked about it. I think I put it on X when someone like Jake LaRavia, for example, he looks confident now. Played basketball before, he played sports in general. Confidence is the biggest thing because if you don't have that, especially in a sport like basketball, like you got to be confident in your ability to knock down a shot, even when everyone's leaving you wide open because they say, "Oh, he's a 25% 3-point shooter. He ain't gonna make it." You got to grab that ball and say, "Watch me." So my surprise is the way that the Grizzlies have developed wing depth because this was kind of a problem going into last offseason. But now you got Vince Williams. He's a dog. He's gonna want to, continue to prove what he's done up to this point is not a fluke. You got Marcus Smart, right? That's another guy who I'm considering a wing in this case because if John Morant plays, Marcus Smart will definitely be on the wing without a doubt. And again, there's the John Conchars, the Luke Kennards. So many names, but at the end of the day, that is the good surprise for me. Before I talk to you about the second surprise, today's show, remember this. Are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day and have to turn down the volume when you're watching it because of all that shouting that they're doing? But make the switch over to Locked On Sports Today, a free 24/7 sports stream channel program for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all that screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't miss analysis, opinions, and news. Streaming the 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. That's part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team each and every single day. So we talked about the surprises. Well, what about the bummers? There are a couple things that come to mind. And of course the obvious bummer is injuries, right? So many times this season the Grizzlies thought, "Oh yeah, we're about to get this guy back and we're about to go on a run," and then boom, a run doesn't happen. But it's because of all the injuries that have been stockpiled. You talk about the Grizzlies have set the record. Most active players to play in a game in one season. That's a record currently owned by the Memphis Grizzlies. Starting lineups. 51 starting lineups used this season. You heard me right. 51 starting lineups, 79 games. 80 games, excuse me. 80 games. All of those things being said, those are easy way outs as far as the bummers. Like we know the injuries and whatnot are a big part of it, but that's the biggest bummer for me. Like it's hard to think of anything else. Zaire Williams looked good when Ja was on the floor. He looked good and looked like a completely different player. The shooting really didn't matter in the struggles or whatnot. He was catching alley oops. He was getting out in transition. He was playing Zaire Williams basketball. But all things considered, the injuries didn't allow us to see enough of what he could bring to the table. The injuries, even in the way, we've seen a lot of Jake LaRavia over the last couple months, but there was a point in February where even Jake himself kind of said he had to mentally push himself through that stretch because of the challenges of being injured when you know there's a lot of playing time out there for you. So the injuries take center stage in terms of what really kind of were the bummers, this season. If you want to really get into it, there are a couple other things that come to mind. I remember Santi Aldama. It wasn't even this year. It was the year before that where he told me that he was going to start eating, 6-7 meals a day and wanted to bulk up. And here we are in 2024, and it's still one of his biggest problems. Guys are pushing him out of the way. And the thing is, Santi is extremely talented on the offensive end. But when you're not getting it done on defense, Taylor Jenkins will limit your minutes. So that's another one that feels kind of like a bummer, in a way from the standpoint of the injuries and all of that. So surprises, the wing depth. The Grizzlies got a whole bunch of wing depth, and the bummer we just talked about the injuries. If you want to take it even deeper with the depth issues, we talked about the wing depth. But the front court depth has kind of decimated a little bit. You still got your Brandon Clark, Santi Aldama backup duo, and Jaren Jackson Jr. potentially as a starter. And I know we've explored the idea of Jaren Jackson Jr. even playing alongside of Brandon Clark in the starting lineup. the Grizzlies still need another center, and that was another, I guess, bummer from this season. The fact that Steven Adams, the fact that Xavier Tillman were both traded at the deadline. Two guys who were previous big pieces on the Grizzlies, not just in the regular season. Two guys who started a lot of playoff games, over the last couple seasons for the Grizzlies as well. But now that we've gotten all that out of the way, let's talk about this weekend. 2 games left for the Memphis Grizzlies, and also Breakdown Day is coming up where we'll get to talk to John Morant, Desmond Bain, Zach Kleiman, and many more. So stay tuned for that coming up here on Locked on Grizzlies as we talk about that, because we haven't talked about those guys in a long time, especially John Morant. We haven't talked to him publicly on the record. And we're going to talk about that, all that good stuff here coming up. But before we get to that, this episode is also brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. It's playoffs time in the NBA and in the NHL, and baseball's in full swing, and FanDuel is your place to bet on every game. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $150. And it's win or lose. So you don't have to win to get the $150 in bonus bets. It's win or lose. Bet on everything from slap shots, home runs, slam dunks. It's all on the app, and it's safe, secure, and easy to use. So what are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com/locked-on and make your first bet an automatic win. FanDuel is America's #1 sportsbook. Coming up here on Locked On Grizzlies, we're going to preview the weekend as well as talk a little bit about Monday's Breakdown Day. Stay tuned for that. Welcome back to Locked On Grizzlies, everyone. I am Damichael Cole, beat writer for the Commercial Appeal here in Memphis, Tennessee. I want to thank you guys for tuning in to Locked On Grizzlies with us each and every single day. And today, so far, we reflected on the season that has been through 80 games for the Memphis Grizzlies. And we also gave out some surprises and some bummers so far for this season. But as we get into the weekend, the Grizzlies do have 2 more games left now. 2 games technically on the schedule, but there are not going to be many guys that you would have expected to play. If you would have gave me a bingo card or something at the beginning of the season, or just a checklist or whatever or the case, or just made a wager with me and said, Damichael, who do you think would be the last 2 men standing? Or the last man standing, because there's only one, from the 15-man roster at the end of the season, who would be playing in that game? And it would have been a lot before I said Jake LaRavia probably. It's John Morant, Desmond, all those guys. What? None of them are playing? That's the case. The Grizzlies will be without 13 players against the Los Angeles Lakers. And the Lakers got something to play for, right? Like, the Lakers are playing for seeding, so this is a pretty important game for them. And the Grizzlies, it's pretty unimportant. Most of the big key guys are out for this one. And again, 13 players. I don't think I've really ever seen anything like that. And then it's probably not going to get any easier on Sunday when the Grizzlies have the Denver Nuggets in town. The reigning champs are fighting for #1 seed in the Western Conference. So they might even have some starters out there in that game as well. So that's pretty much the weekend, how you can look forward to these games. Again, the players who are expected to play, I think it's easier because right now it's 21 players total. 13 players are out with injuries, and then there are 8 still left on the team. And pretty much the breakdown is 2 players who are on the 15-man roster. Then there are 3 two-way players, and there are 3 guys on 10-day contracts. So 3 guys on two-way contracts, and 3 guys on 10-day contracts, as well as the 2 players who are on the 15-man roster already in Gigi Jackson and Jake LaRavia. So now we have that all out of the way. We're going to touch on this a little bit, and then we'll get deeper into it as Monday gets here and whatnot. But Breakdown Day is approaching. And for those who don't know what I'm talking about when I say Breakdown Day and things like that, it's where we talk with the players. And, of course, here on Locked On Grizzlies, we have all the sights and sounds on what's said. Please, if you have any questions that you want to suggest, be sure to leave them in our YouTube comments, or you see my if you're watching on YouTube, you see my Twitter or X handle below. And if you're just listening, then my X handle is at Damichael C. As Zach Kleiman talks, Taylor Jenkins talks, we will get into all the conversations about those guys in terms of what needs to be done for the Grizzlies to reach that championship level that so many are thirsting after, or quite frankly, what did they learn from this season? I think that's a big question, especially for Kleiman. And it's going to be really telling because if Kleiman didn't learn much from this season, he's probably not going to make a lot of moves. And I know how some fans are about, you know, the, I guess, lack of aggressiveness in the offseason with trades and free agency moves and things like that. So it could get a little boring. But I don't think that will be the case here in Memphis. Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. And now it's also available on Amazon Fire TV and the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Day is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every single league. Find Locked On Sports Today now, available on the free Fire TV channels app. We'll see how these next two Grizzlies games play out and whatnot. But all things considered, it. I mean, if you would have told me, I'm thinking of the road record here. The Grizzlies 18 this season, last season 16 wins on the road. You would have told me that, I would have thought this team would have went to the mountaintop probably. If you said, hey, the Grizzlies gonna have a better road record in this season than last season, on top of the offensive firepower that was expected and whatnot. But that's what that's the state of things right now with the Memphis Grizzlies. But make sure you continue to tune in with us because we got a lot of fun things to talk about. Like I said, on Monday, it's going to be breakdown day. We're going to talk to Zach Kleiman, Taylor Jenkins, pretty much all of the players. So if you have any questions for them, make sure you leave it down in our YouTube comments section, and we'll make sure we try to get that answered for you and get that addressed as well. Locked On Grizzlies. Remember that Locked On Grizzlies is free and available wherever you get your podcast. And once again, I'm Damichael Cole, and we'll see you next time on Locked On Grizzlies.